Tonight, the flags are bigger than the rigs. A stadium-sized Stars and Stripes hangs over a blistering West Texas pad, the kind you can see from Google Earth. Cameras sweep, music hits, and Donald Trump steps to a gold-tipped microphone and declares the return of a golden era for American shale. He calls it independence. He calls it dominance. He calls it the day America stops asking and starts drilling. Confetti cannons misfire in the heat. A flare stack hisses like a warning. No one hears it over the applause. For 40 minutes, he rewrites physics and price curves with a slogan. Permits will fly, he says. Red tape will burn. The EPA becomes three letters in a punchline. He promises a pipeline every month, a lease every mile, a well every sunrise, production first, markets later. He signs a ceremonial order on stage the size of a pizza box. Executives grin for the cutaway. Workers wave lunch pails and ball caps. The spectacle sells the policy before the numbers can object. 2 months pass, the numbers object, rigs multiply, frack crews sprint, trucks stack up at dawn like a convoy, crude floods gathering systems, then tanks, then storage hubs. Traders watch the screens and yawn at another record week. It takes only a few more record weeks for the yawns to turn into alarms. Prices slip, then slide. The curve inverts, shipping differentials widen. Shale barrels trip over each other, trying to reach a buyer who now has too many friends. The field radios change tone. Fewer new pads, more standby, more call me next month. At a yard outside Midland, the flag from opening day reappears. It is not tied to a crane anymore. It is rolled on a pallet beside a dented toolbox, resting between boxes of unsold merch that say, Make oil great again, in a font licensed for vengeance. A driller rips off a strip of fabric to wipe mud from a pressure gauge. He shrugs at the camera. It's absorbent, he says, and goes back to bleeding a line. This is not bad luck. This is policy as pageant. A rush to pump without a plan for the bill. A bet that the world will always pay any price for the same barrel because a politician shouted at it. The market does not salute. The market calculates. Supply outruns demand, and gravity does what gravity does. The promise of cheap energy for families becomes an unpaid invoice for families who work the patch. Overtime disappears. Local diners lose the breakfast rush. Steel yards cut shifts. Schools postpone repairs. When the boom is built on a press conference, the bust arrives on a Tuesday afternoon with no music. The contradictions stack up faster than the pipe. Tariffs on imported steel raise the cost of the very pipelines the White House cheers. Waivers for flaring push cheap gas into the sky while power grids beg for flexibility. Energy dominance claims to shield America from foreign shocks, then collides with a global market that does not care about slogans, only about barrels. The administration says drill more to earn more, and the price signal answers drill more, earn less. You cannot conquer arithmetic with a rally. Listen to the people who never make the stage. A service company owner spreads invoices on a tailgate and taps a column of red. We staffed up because the president said he'd keep us busy, she says. Now I'm laying off crews because he kept everyone busy. A roughneck in a motel lobby scrolls job sites that used to be flooded. Now it's one listing, 200 applicants, no per diem. A county commissioner holds two budgets, the one voters saw on opening day and the one they will get after the music stopped. Roads still need to be paved. Ambulances still need to be fueled. Quiet costs are the only things that go up on time. Meanwhile, the global ledger watches. Every surge here invites a response there. Producers abroad open taps an extra notch to defend market share. Refiners switch slates. Storage fills. Paper barrels multiply. The White House calls it winning. Traders call it contango. Families call it uncertainty. The slogan promised freedom from OPEC. The outcome delivered a new dependence on hope. There were alternatives. Temper the ramp, build storage where it matters, incentivize firm demand with industry that uses what we produce, not just headlines that consume what we believe. Pair any new oil with new rules for methane, with real investments in grids and batteries that keep power prices steady when wells wobble. But that would require policy, not performance. It would require talking to engineers before booking the band. At sunset, the opening day stage is a skeleton. The crane that held the banner is gone. A windsock points to nowhere. The field is quiet, except for a lone pump jack nodding like a metronome of denial. A foreman locks the yard and pockets a key he may not need for a while. We were told to flood the world, he says, looking past the horizon that won't look back. Turns out the world can swim. And in the corner, someone has folded the giant flag into a careful rectangle. It is too big for tradition, too soiled for ceremony, too heavy to carry into another campaign. It sits on the pallet, waiting for a market that will not pay for symbols, waiting for a policy that will not arrive by motorcade. The camera lingers. The flare stack coughs a last breath of wasted gas. The screen cuts to black. Here is how the spectacle turned into a spreadsheet. Shale wells decline fast. You front load cash, you front load labor, and the first months look like victory. Then output drops. To keep volume flat, you drill again. To grow, you drill faster. The rally encouraged speed without strategy. Lenders bought the chant. High yield desks stitched together energy independence into coupon payments and covenants that assumed the line would only go up. Service companies bought new fleets on credit. Counties expanded water systems on anticipated tax receipts. When price slipped, the treadmill kept running. When price slid, the treadmill sped up. Pump more to compensate for less revenue per barrel, then watch the new barrels push the price lower still. That is not a cycle. That is a trap. On the ground, you could hear the trap closing. DUCs drilled but uncompleted wells, stacked like unsent letters. Sand deliveries were rerouted and rerouted again. Flaring exemptions turned the night sky into a silent fireworks show no one asked for. We throw cheap gas at the stars, a shift lead says, because there's nowhere else to put it. Grid operators begged for flexible supply and storage. The policy answer was more holes in the earth. The contradiction is a neon sign. We waste the fuel that could stabilize power prices, then blame renewables for volatility we chose. Tariffs made it worse. The White House promised to build, then taxed the steel you need to build. Pipe costs jumped. Refinery maintenance got pricier. A Gulf Coast operator joked that his new patriotic margin was negative. He was not smiling. The speech said America first. The invoice said import surcharge. The rig count rose on cue. The cash flow did not. Wall Street heard the tone change. A year ago, the president's stagecraft could sell a roadshow in 10 minutes. Now investor calls sounded like courtroom depositions. What is your break even at $X? How many wells are economic without hedges? Where is free cash flow after interest and lease obligations? The answers drifted into acronyms and optimism. Analysts started modeling layoffs, not liftings. The bond desks watched spreads widen and said nothing on the record. Silence is a market's vote of no confidence. Communities paid first. School boards froze hiring. Volunteer fire departments raffled off donated grills to fund hoses. Rural hospitals delayed, replacing a failing CT scanner because the county severance tax haul was 30% light. The sheriff's office parked two cruisers that needed transmission work and told deputies to pair up. At a diner that used to run 24 hours, the owner covers the pie case with a faded newspaper from opening day and calls it the museum. The administration tried a new line: blame green extremists for market weakness. But the weakness was homegrown. You cannot sue a spreadsheet. You cannot subpoena a demand curve. You cannot shout a refinery into running heavier crude if the economics say otherwise. The promise of jobs, not Germany, rigs, not regulation, never answered the basic question: who is the buyer and at what price? Policy is supposed to make the answer sturdier. Pageants make it shakier. Meanwhile, the northern border hums. As shale barrels jostle each other south of the 49th, Canadian grids add wind, add transmission, add storage. Power marketers sign firm export contracts into U.S. regions that crave stability more than rhetoric. A Calgary executive texted me one line after watching the Texas rally: if they flood oil, we'll sell electrons. That is the quiet trade of the decade's security, not spectacle. Margins, not megaphones. Back in West Texas, the flag is clean now. Someone washed it. Someone thought it mattered. The yard manager wants to hang it again when things turn. He looks at the price strip on his phone and pockets it without comment. The crew clocks out early. The flare is smaller tonight. The camera pulls wide, and you see what the slogan never showed: a field of pumps moving like heads in prayer, not triumph. Faith is not a plan. Markets are not believers. Arithmetic is undefeated. Let's put faces to the fallout. Odessa, Texas. A union rep spreads pink slips on a folding table, the kind used for church potlucks. He is not a partisan, he is a calculator. 47 this week, he says, 72 last. A pump tech with 12 years in the patch asks if his health insurance covers a move to Alberta. He laughs at his own question, then stops. In the background, a rig creaks like a radio tower in wind. The anthem has ended. The aftercare begins. The White House still frames this as a fight against globalists who hate American energy. That line works at rallies. It fails in ledgers. Shale needs foreign buyers. That is the paradox. Energy independence funded by export dependence. If Asia bids low, heartland paychecks adjust to the price of distant storms. The president promised insulation. He delivered exposure. Ask the pipe yard that stocked up for a pipeline wave only to discover tariffs turned each spool into a margin killer. Ask the Gulf Coast refinery manager who cannot run the lighter shale slate efficiently without investing in kit. His board refuses to approve under policy whiplash. He calls it dominance. They call it stranded assets. The distance between those phrases is unemployment. Meanwhile, Canada operates like a quiet utility. Quebec and Ontario continue firm power exports into New England. Manitoba ships steady hydropower south, while U.S. grids juggle spikes. Alberta mirrors global reality: diversify or drown. Wind, solar, and storage scale under provincial fights that would make a U.S. cable hit show. But the build continues. A Canadian banker explains the model to me in one sentence: profit from predictability. The U.S. Federal model under Trump reverses the math. Campaign off chaos. Capital chooses the first. Workers get the second. Watch the gas market. Methane leaks are cheap until they are priced. The administration shrank enforcement and mocked monitors as bureaucrats with balloons. But traders price risk, not tweets. Insurance firms hate opacity. Utilities prefer certainty on emissions rules to avoid future lawsuits. A Texas operator told me off camera, I can fix leaks with wrenches. I can't hedge Washington's mood. That is the point. Regulation is not a religion, it is a schedule. Schedules are bankable. Now turn to steel. The tariffs meant to save American steel added weight to every energy project that needed American steel. The mills caught a trade bump. Midstream budgets took a hit. That hit delayed maintenance. Delays turned into incidents. Incidents became headlines that fed the very narrative used to stop projects next time. It is a circular firing squad with patriotic decals. The White House posed at a mill. The field paid for the photograph. The global stage did not wait. OPEC Plus nudged volumes like a conductor tapping a baton. Russia played its own sheet music. The U.S. opened the Strategic Petroleum Reserve last cycle to tame prices, then talked about rebuilding dominance by drilling more this cycle. SPR is a tool, not a toy. When you politicize inventory, you teach markets to price politics. Volatility goes premium. Families pay it at the pump through 1,000 micro shocks that look like random noise. They are not random, they are policy. Back in Midland, the service company warehouse is full of almosts. Almost new mud motors, bought at the height of the hype. Almost signed contracts that died when the curve bent south. Almost raises that turned into we'll revisit next quarter. The owner runs her finger down a column labeled Days Sales Outstanding. It is a number with a story. Her clients are good people in bad math. She still delivers parts because refusing would make enemies. Loyalty is a cost center. In Detroit, an automaker CFO reads the same price strip and cancels a U.S. battery pilot to preserve cash. We'll buy electrons from Canada and credits from California and hope Washington stops turning efficiency into a culture war, he says. That sentence is a blueprint and an indictment. Efficiency is not ideology. It is arithmetic with benefits. But under Trump's energy doctrine, megawatts became political affiliation. The grid cannot run on affiliations. Grids need planning. Planning needs time. Time needs consistency. Consistency needs adult supervision. Trump offered a remix of 2018 slogans as a 2025 program and called it leadership. The result is not just lower prices today, it is weaker resilience tomorrow. When demand snaps back, you cannot flip a switch on a shuttered crew or a canceled compressor station. The delay becomes a premium. The premium becomes an inflation headline. The headline becomes another rally prop. We repeat. A final scene for tonight. A contractor in Pecos tosses a bundle of microfiber rags into the bed of his truck. On top, folded neatly, sits the giant flag from opening day. He keeps it clean out of respect, not belief. I'll hang it again, he says. When someone shows me a plan that survives contact with a spreadsheet, he starts the engine, dust blooms. The camera tracks the taillights until they dissolve into a horizon built on heat, mirage, and hope. Then a cut to a control room in Quebec, a row of monitors, a calm operator, a hydropower dispatch scheduled to the minute. Two countries, two models, one future picking its supplier. Here are the mechanics behind the myth. Energy dominance was sold as a wall, thick, tall, unbreakable. In practice, it was a trampoline. You jump high on headlines, then gravity brings you down harder than before. The White House framed drilling as defense. The market read it as oversupply. Export terminals booked slots, buyers shaved bids, tankers queued with no rush from the receiving end. When you convert geophysics into campaign merchandise, the only guaranteed uplift is in warehouse inventory. Credit began to ration reality. Private lenders moved from growth at any cost to cash or pass. Covenants tightened. The patch that used to live on tomorrow's barrels was told to live within today's. Cost of capital rose like a hidden royalty. You could see it in little details: fewer hot shots, more postponed tool repairs, a new policy where per diem gets audited like a defense contract. A forklift operator told me, they say cut fat. I'm looking for bone. In campaign speeches, that sentence doesn't exist. In balance sheets, it's everywhere. Now the macro picture. Oil is global. Politics are local. Prices are both. Every loud surge from Texas gave quiet leverage to producers who can wait. They did. Some trimmed, some didn't. Most watched the U.S. burn runway on takeoff. When the glide stalled, the same officials who mocked coordination discovered an inconvenient fact. Without coordination, you are a price taker with better slogans. We will outproduce them is not a plan, it is a tell. Downstream, the contradictions multiplied. The administration waved off methane rules to save pennies, then watched utilities price in billions in risk. It celebrated flaring leniency while scolding the grid for volatility that flaring worsens. It cheered tariffs that raised input costs on pipelines and refineries, then blamed globalists for project delays the tariffs caused. It called this a war on red tape. The frontline casualties were red ink. Across the border, Canada exploited the arbitrage Trump created, hydro dispatch into U.S. markets during peak heat, wind and storage, smoothing out the hours when gas peakers choke on price spikes. Power marketers packaging stability at a premium Americans now accept as a discount to chaos. A Calgary portfolio manager says, we sell certainty. It is not poetry, it is revenue. And it undercuts the White House thesis that only hydrocarbons can underwrite prosperity. In 2025, predictability is the commodity with the highest return. Communities kept paying. A steel fabricator in Ohio that expected a tariff dividend found that energy project cancellations ate the gain. A plastics plant in Louisiana saw feedstock cheapen, then margin vanish as recession clouds rolled in from an overpumped market. School districts in Texas learned a brutal footnote. Severance taxes fade faster than campaign videos. Buses still run on Monday. Lunch still needs to be served at 11:30. The deficit is not a talking point. It is a line item that asks a superintendent to choose between librarians and HVAC. The White House pivoted to blame environmentalists, foreigners, fake numbers, grid operators, but the receipts exist. The price strip isn't a newspaper columnist. It is a forecast built by people who bet careers on being right often enough to keep their desks. The curve flattened after the rally and never recovered. Traders stopped fading the downside because the downside was policy. We hedge speeches now, a Houston risk manager told me, half joke, full truth. Return to the field. The giant flag is back on the wall in the yard shop, bleached by the Permian sun into a quiet pink, white, and blue. A welder flicks off his visor and says he'll miss the overtime, not the whiplash. A pumper points to a trailer with a help wanted sign crossed out in Sharpie. Underneath, someone wrote, help wanted next cycle. This is the essence of the critique. Cycles happen, policy chooses amplitudes. Trump chose amplitude maximum spectacle, minimal shock absorbers, and the closing image. North of the line, a control room clock flips to the top of the hour. Hydropower goes up a notch. A utility in New England reports a stable day ahead. No confetti, no crane, just electrons moving like a promise kept. The camera splits the screen, one grid dispatch, one idle rig, and asks the only question that matters. Which side looks like the future and which side looks like a rerun? Follow the money. Campaign theatrics promised cheap energy forever, but the bills landed where cameras don't go. On municipal desks, in utility control rooms, inside loan files. A Texas county auditor walks me through a spreadsheet that looks like a crime scene. Severance tax short, property tax reassessment delayed, emergency funds tapped for road repairs that shale traffic already chewed to gravel. The shortfall is not ideology. It is asphalt and payroll. When price dips, towns bleed. Zoom out. The White House called for a surge. Producers surged. OPEC Plus smirked. Swing suppliers trimmed just enough to keep options open and to let U.S. barrels do the tiring work of saturating demand. Washington mistook volume for leverage. Traders did not. They priced a floor lower, a ceiling closer, and a volatility premium higher. The promise of stability through abundance turned into instability through excess. That contradiction is the signature of this doctrine. Confuse activity with security and call the fallout fake. Downstream, the grid ate the shock. Gas was flared because pipes lagged. Then the same officials scolded wind for being intermittent. But intermittency is not a moral failing. It is an engineering problem solved by transmission and storage. Those are the two things the administration refused to champion because they are not photogenic at rallies. No one cheers a substation ribbon cutting. Everyone pays when the substation is missing. That is the lesson markets keep teaching and politicians keep skipping. Manufacturing caught the ricochet. A Gulf Coast plastics plant saw ethane cheap, great, until a demand wobble erased margins and a financing hiccup driven by policy whiplash postponed an expansion that would have soaked up surplus gas, cheap input. Expensive uncertainty. Projects do not pencil when the policy horizon is a meme cycle. Meanwhile, north of the border, Canadian provinces did the boring things: capacity auctions, intertees, long-dated PPAs for storage. Boring beats bombastic in any quarter that ends with a balance sheet. Workers carried the weight. A frac foreman with 20 crews now runs 9. His people can pivot to renewables, maintenance, if there were more grid jobs. There are not enough because the federal message turned grid into a partisan word. So he picks winners the only way he can, who has a kid in chemo, who is one payment from a repossession, who just moved for the promise of dominance. This is governance by raffle. This is what happens when a slogan sets schedules. Financial markets adapted with cruelty disguised as discipline. Equity investors demanded free cash flow over growth. Debt investors demanded covenants shaped like choke collars. The White House demanded applause. These demands cannot coexist. Public companies perform the ritual: sell non-core assets, promise capital returns, pray the strip holds. Private operators with leaner balance sheets bought scraps at discounts and dug carefully. The irony writes itself. The only drilling that made sense ignored the president's tempo. Internationally, the credibility gap widened. Allies heard energy dominance as energy drift. Canada executed a dual track: keep pipelines that pass modern standards and build the electric spine that sells reliability at scale into U.S. markets. Europe hedged U.S. noise by ordering hardware, heat pumps, batteries, firm contracts so politics could not shut off the heat in winter. Asia signed more long-term deals with whoever could guarantee less drama. That was not Washington. And the climate math, it never paused. Methane leaks counted even when inspectors didn't. Wildfire smoke moved across borders without a visa. Insurance losses spoke fluently in every legislature's language. Premiums? The administration framed climate as a lecture from elites. Insurers framed it as a bill to everyone. You can intimidate a scientist on TV. You cannot bully an actuary. That quiet resistance matters. It shapes capital more than hashtags. Back in the Permian, a contractor unwraps new rags for the shop floor. The giant flag from the rally is folded on a shelf above his head, spotless now, preserved like an exhibit from a time when a chant could move a curve. He leans on a workbench and recites the arithmetic that governs his day. Diesel up, overtime down, sand on back order, accounts payable, aging like milk. He points at the rags and grins without humor. These don't smear, he says. They absorb. It sounds like a product review. It is a policy review. Cut to Quebec at dusk. Hydropower hums. Battery state of charge rises for the evening ramp. A dispatcher adjusts by megawatts, not adjectives. New England's demand curve slides through the hour like a hand through water. No breaking news, no gold-tipped microphone, just competence. On the split screen, a West Texas flare coughs a last plume into a wind that does not vote. Two countries, two theories of power. One of them works whether anyone is cheering or not. Here is the part no rally covered. Diesel. The patch runs on it. Farms run on it. Freight runs on it. The same playbook that flooded crude also kinked the middle of the barrel where truckers live. Refinery maintenance was deferred because steel got pricier and policy got noisy. Complex kit that turns crude into the heavy molecules you need did not get the upgrades. Boards had greenlit pre-spectacle, then the price fell, then margins swung, then the work slipped another quarter. A trucking dispatcher in Lubbock points to his screen. More loads, fewer gallons, priced in advance. We can plan routes, he says. We can't plan Washington. That sentence is the National Logistics Report in 12 words. Ports felt it next. Gulf Coast terminals booked a season of optimism. Then the curve softened and slot reservations turned into dead air on VHF. A pilot boat captain tells me he hasn't seen this much waiting since the last time politics tried to outshout physics. Rail yards echoed the same sound. Brake, squeal without cargo. You can't fill a consist with slogans. You can fill a news cycle, but you cannot meter product from a podium. Meanwhile, Canadian Interties hummed, power crossed quietly into U.S. ISO markets. At the exact hours the grid needed it most. Traders in Boston called it the Canadian umbrella. It is not romance, it is dispatch. The White House answered with the oldest parlor trick in energy. Promise a new mega project and frame opposition as treason. A pipeline here, a refinery there, a national permitting blitz. The map looked bold on TV. On the ground, local tax bases asked how to fund the roads the blitz would chew without the revenue the blitz had already erased. A county judge in the Eagle Ford slid me a memo from the highway department. Emergency patching instead of rebuilds. Weight limits on routes that rigs rely on. Fines that underwrite a fraction of the damage. When your growth plan destroys the lanes you need to grow, you are not a builder. You are a vandal with a press office. Safety degraded too. Deferred overhauls become hazards that look like luck to people who don't read MOC paperwork. A late night seal failure, a small fire, a bigger scare. The administration blamed red tape. The incident report blamed a gasket that should have been replaced on a schedule that should have been funded by a margin that should have existed if policy had not manufactured volatility. Accountability is a chain. The last link is flame. The first link is a sound bite. Workers are not abstractions in this story. A rig medic in Wink looks at a dwindling supply closet and asks where the new AED went, and procurement froze it. The contractor who drives water trucks splits his week with an overnight shift at a big box store for health benefits. A welder takes a day job at a school district because the hours are steady, even if the pay is not. None of them were on stage when the golden microphone shone like a promise. All of them are on the ledger the morning after. Then a counterpoint from north of the border that no one in Washington will quote. A Canadian utility sends a note to its U.S. counterpart confirming capacity for the coming heat wave. The email is 5 sentences long, all numbers and times, no adjectives. A New England system operator reads it and relaxes a fraction. This is what policy that believes in engineering sounds like. Kilowatts, not culture wars. Reliability, not rally clips. Even Alberta, long caricatured as oil only, finds its grid mix tilting more flexible by the month. If you want to see the future, follow the paperwork. It is painfully boring. That is why it works. The global market kept score. Asia bought barrels on terms that punished volatility. Europe bought LNG with clauses that preferred suppliers who did not threaten to weaponize exports on Twitter. Canada sold hydropower at firm prices and used the proceeds to finance yet more boring infrastructure. U.S. diplomacy tried to sell dominance. Balance sheets tried to buy insurance. Guess who closed the deal? The administration cycled to a new scapegoat, woke capital. But capital is not woke, it is awake. It sees methane that will be priced. It sees storms that will be modeled. It sees regulation whipsawed by cameras, and it prices the whip, not the camera. A Houston CFO showed me a slide he will never present publicly. Cost of capital versus policy variability, plotted across time. The line slopes up like a warning flare. If the podium calms down, he says my coupon does too. Translate that from finance. Your slogan is an interest rate hike. One more contradiction before the cut. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve became a punchline and a prop. You cannot threaten to use the SPR into every down day without teaching traders to fade you, nor can you refill it on a tweet. Inventories respond to pumps and pipes and procurement, not applause lines. When you politicize the reserve, you discount its power. That discount shows up at the pump as noise. Voters experience noise as pain. Pain becomes resentment. Resentment becomes the next rally. This is not strategy. It is an Ouroboros of self-inflicted volatility. Back in Texas, the flag from opening day hangs again, but indoors, behind glass, like a museum piece about confidence intervals. Outside, the sun drills the yard harder than any bit ever did. A hand wipes his brow with a shop rag and laughs at the memory of using a national banner to clean a gauge. We got better rags now, he says, then looks at the idle trucks. We could use better plans. North, a control room dials down a hydro unit by 2% to balance a cloud bank over Vermont. You can hear the difference between the two countries if you listen carefully. One is a chant, the other is a schedule. Only one keeps the lights on. Politics tried to bully physics. It also tried to bully finance. Neither blinked. After the Golden Era rally, White House surrogates toured TV sets with the same line: America can outdrill the world into cheap prosperity. The bond market replied with a coupon. Credit spreads widened for producers overexposed to short cycle shale, especially those whose investor decks looked like campaign clips stitched to half-finished decline curves. A private credit fund in New York told me it now prices policy noise like a hurricane factor. That is the quiet tax of spectacle and interest rate on performative governance. You do not see it at rallies. You feel it in payroll cuts. Utilities wrote their own verdict. They prefer firm supply, predictable rules, and assets that last 30 years. Shale under this doctrine offers the opposite: a treadmill of wells whose value depends on a price the administration whipsaws with microphones. So grid planners did the adult thing: sign long tenor deals for transmission and storage, especially where Canadian hydropower can anchor reliability and where regional batteries shave peaks that gas peakers use to chase. It is not ideology, it is loss aversion. Nobody wants to explain blackouts to regulators because a president wanted confetti. Manufacturers voted with capex. The sales pitch from Washington said cheap patriotic energy forever. The spreadsheet said volatile inputs, tariff boomerangs, and culture war headlines that threatened demand. A Midwestern appliance maker shelved a U.S. plant expansion and instead inked a power purchase agreement tied to a Canadian-backed wind farm feeding a cross-border intertie. The CFO's note to the board was 4 sentences: lower variance, lower legal risk, higher brand safety, same kilowatt hours. That is how dominance loses to dullness. Stability is a feature you can monetize. Workers understood before anyone else. A compressor mechanic in the Delaware Basin shows me his week: 3 call-outs, 2 cancellations, 1 emergency job he cannot finish because a part is stuck in tariff limbo. I don't care what they chant, he says. I care if the invoice clears. A safety officer flips through near-miss reports, each one a diagram of deferred maintenance masquerading as luck. He circles a gasket speck and taps the page. This is what cut the red tape sounds like in real life. The administration calls it efficiency. The field calls it exposure. Meanwhile, Canada keeps converting rhetoric into revenue. Hydro-Quebec schedules exports into New England's evening ramp. Alberta's auctions add utility-scale storage that earns by smoothing the very volatility the U.S. now manufactures by choice. Ontario quietly finalizes contracts that turn clean baseload from a talking point into a dispatchable product. The political theater south of the line does not stop electrons at the border, it invites them. When your neighbor destabilizes his grid, your stability becomes his import plan. Internationally, allies adapted. Europe's lesson from the last energy shock was simple: diversify away from politics. So purchase managers wrote clauses that favor suppliers with credible regulation, not louder slogans. Asia signed contracts that penalize discretionary export bans dressed up as patriotism. The administration mistook chest thumping for leverage. It turned out to be a tell, broadcasting that Washington would treat energy as a prop. Markets hate props. They price props like risk. On climate, the denial theater met actuarial arithmetic. Insurers repriced wildfire and flood exposure across U.S. energy corridors, then handed those premiums to every project that needs a permit. The White House dismissed it as woke modeling. Lenders called it updated loss experience. Those words matter more than hashtags. They move thresholds for what gets built, where, and at what return. You can shout at a scientist, you cannot browbeat a reinsurance treaty. So, where does the story go? In the patch, consolidation accelerates. The only operators who thrive are the ones that ignore the president's tempo and drill to their balance sheets, not to his teleprompter. In boardrooms, Made in America survives as a marketing line attached to power that may be scheduled across a border. In politics, the slogan factory finds a new villain to blame for arithmetic. And in one last split screen, you can see the contrast we keep returning to. A West Texas flare coughing into a twilight of excuses, and a Canadian control room adjusting hydropower by 5-minute increments. One is noise, one is a signal, only one pays dividends you can take to a bank. At a truck stop off I-20, a billboard from the rally still peers over the pumps. Make oil great again and again and again. A driver tops off diesel at a price that doesn't match the promise. He wipes the handle with a rag, glances at the horizon, and says the line that should have closed the first speech, not the seventh. We dug deeper. They took off. The camera holds. The numbers already have. The camera fades in on a trading floor. Monitors glow in silence. Crude futures tick lower by cents that feel like verdicts. No panic, just fatigue. The traders have learned that every time Trump promises a new golden era, the market quietly subtracts $10 from the long-term forecast. They call it the rally discount. One broker whispers, he talks, we short. That's how faith becomes arbitrage. At the Department of Energy, aides rewrite memos to match the mood of the hour. One day it's maximize shale output. The next, protect domestic producers. No one defines protect. It could mean tariffs or it could mean Tuesday. Policy made by slogans is policy made of smoke. A civil servant, gray-haired, near retirement, closes a folder labeled Energy Dominance Initiative and says under his breath, we've been here before. Every crash just comes with better hats. He means the red ones. The administration calls it self-reliance. Economists call it self-inflicted exposure. When the United States floods supply, prices fall globally, margins collapse. Competitors abroad pick up assets Americans can't keep afloat. In the name of sovereignty, the government subsidizes insolvency. Meanwhile, Canada refines the art of pragmatism. Its energy exports grow not through chest beating, but through math, credible regulation, predictable taxes, clean branding that meets Europe's carbon import rules. Canadian oil now trades with a premium once reserved for American barrels. That's not luck, that's consequence. Across the Great Lakes, a Michigan steel plant that once supplied pipe for shale fields now machines turbine parts for Ontario wind farms. The foreman points to a shipment tagged Export CA Grid Storage. He laughs. Used to send our stuff south, now it goes north and comes back as electrons. The irony would be funny if it weren't so perfectly efficient. In the patch, foremen count wells like tombstones. The math doesn't lie. Decline rates outpace dreams. A young roughneck who tattooed Trump 2024 on his bicep during the boom scrolls job listings for solar maintenance techs. Panels don't lay me off when oil sneezes, he says. His crewmate smirks. You gonna vote with that arm next time? The laugh dies halfway. Meanwhile, suburban America pays the bill disguised as volatility. Gasoline prices dance to a rhythm set by hubris and lag. Inflation jitters return. The same officials who blamed the Fed last year now blame green radicals, but no radical ordered the rigs to multiply. No activist printed the tariffs. No bureaucrat told traders to hedge political mood swings. Those were choices. The cost is cumulative. Foreign capitals take notes. Berlin calls Ottawa, not Washington, for coordination talks. Seoul signs a long-term LNG deal with Qatar instead of the US. We like steady, one Korean negotiator tells me, off the record. America is a season, not a partner. In diplomacy, that line hurts more than any sanction. It means the soft power of predictability, the most profitable export of the 20th century, is now imported from somewhere else. The White House Communications Office, cornered by numbers, releases a new catchphrase: freedom molecules too. Even Fox News anchors can't keep a straight face. Markets certainly don't. Futures tick down another $0.50. When faith becomes parity, you've reached the far side of dominance. Back at the Midland Yard, the camera pans across rusting pump jacks and half-empty fuel tanks. A worker takes a selfie beside the faded banner from that first rally, the one that promised jobs forever. The image goes viral under a new hashtag, number forever was 2 months. The comments are cruel, the empathy rare, the lessons stark. North of the border, the view is almost dull. Steady dispatch, steady payrolls, steady revenue. No fireworks, no rallies. Just lights that stay on and investors who sleep through the night. The narrator's voice drops to a measured tone. While America drilled for applause, Canada engineered for endurance. The future doesn't need slogans, it needs schedules. The shot returns to the West Texas horizon. The flag flutters once, catches on a rusted bolt, and tears along a seam. Dust rises, carrying threads of red and white into the same air the flare once burned. The voiceover closes, gravity always wins. And this time, gravity wears a maple leaf. The week the price finally broke, the White House called it a correction. In Midland, they called it something less polite. The crude index slid under 50. Service companies shuddered. Local radio swapped country songs for auction ads. Used compressors, fair offers. In Washington, Trump staged another victory conference, reading from a teleprompter about record production, as if the word record couldn't also mean worst. Behind him, aides avoided eye contact with the charts. The script said America was winning. The data said America was drowning in its own oil. Cable networks rolled B-roll of flaring skies. Trump waved his hand at the footage. Fake fire, he joked. Investors didn't laugh. Energy stocks lost 8% before the joke finished airing. That's what happens when a market stops believing the man who runs it like a rally. The rhetoric had become an index in itself, each speech an indicator of incoming volatility. Traders used his adjectives as trade signals. Tremendous meant sell. Unbelievable meant short, harder. The impact reached far past the patch. The dollar wobbled. Transport indexes tanked. Farm diesel doubled. Inflation ran in circles. Cheap crude, expensive logistics. Families didn't see dominance, they saw receipts. A single mother in Oklahoma told me she drives 20 miles farther each week to find the one station that still honors the discount card from her husband's old drilling job. She keeps the badge clipped to her rearview mirror, red plastic embossed with Energy Independence Crew. The irony burns worse than fuel. Meanwhile, in Ottawa, ministers discussed a different kind of record. Exports of clean power and low-emission fuels were up 15%. Foreign direct investment in Canada's grid sector hit an all-time high. A senior advisor summarized it perfectly. Every time Trump shouts about energy freedom, Capital migrates here to find stability. On Bay Street, they call it the Trump dividend, profit born from someone else's chaos. Europe joined in. Germany signed a partnership with Alberta on hydrogen development. France increased imports of Canadian biomass. The same allies that Trump had scolded for weakness were now sourcing energy security from the country he ignored. Washington looked inward, Ottawa looked outward. The scoreboard wrote itself. In Texas, the fallout wasn't theoretical. Food banks reported record lines of laid off workers. Churches held energy relief drives next to empty drill pads. The county fair canceled its fireworks. The sponsors had all closed. When asked about aid, the administration pointed to deregulation. Freedom from oversight is the best stimulus, one spokesperson said. For the families living on severance checks, freedom didn't pay rent. At a small diner off Route 385, I met a waitress who served Trump's campaign team during the rally months earlier. She still has the napkin he signed to the Energy Queen of Texas. It hangs framed above the cash register. Now the frame is crooked, one corner taped after the glass cracked in a summer storm. He said we'd be rich forever, she shrugs. Guess forever runs on E. Her eyes drift toward the window where the gas price sign flickers. The markets turned the corner before policy did. Hedge funds closed short positions and bought into renewables. Pension funds that once chased shale yield now flock to grid bonds and Canadian utilities. Quiet capital always knows when the music stops. The traders who bet against the chant were now buying the next decade's infrastructure. We're long silence, one of them told me. No more fireworks. Late one evening, a drone camera sweeps over the desolate pads of West Texas pipes, stacked, rigs rusting, the land scarred with the geometry of overconfidence. The narrator's tone hardens. This is what happens when policy becomes theater. You end up with scenery instead of substance. Cut to a northern landscape, clean lines, hydro dams gleaming under snow, turbines spinning above golden fields. No slogans, no rallies, no hats, just current, constant, and calm. The voiceover ends low, deliberate. Trump promised energy dominance. What he built was dependence on noise, on nostalgia, on himself. Canada sold the antidote, consistency. Fade to black. A single line remains on screen. They drilled for applause. The future runs on silence.